So good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Lior Laks. Lior Laks is an associate professor at Bar-Ilan University, working at the Department of English Literature and not only English linguistics, as he pointed out. He will be talking about loanword adaptation, which is my favorite topic. So I'm really looking forward to this topic. But Lior will talk about how loanwords are adapted in Hebrew, which is very different from the languages we are analyzing. So we will see how loanword adaptation is going on in non-concatenative morphology. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. So as Magda said, I work on morphology, mainly on Semitic languages, Hebrew and Arabic, mostly Palestinian Arabic, but I'm very happy also to collaborate on other languages as well. And I also work a lot of loanwords and how they are integrated mostly from English into languages like Arabic and Hebrew, and to what extent they're adapted, and what competing strategies we have for the adaptation. Today, I'll focus about one and maybe two topics, depends on how the time. And I'll begin with a few examples of loanwords, which are the base for verb formation. You can see in this chart. So you have, for example, the words debug and talkback from English. And we have the verbs debug, to debug something, and tickback, to talkback. And as you can see, they both share the EE pattern. As you know, Semitic morphology relies a great extent on non-concatenative morphology, which is the combination of the root and the pattern. So the pattern is represented with the capital C, the slots for the consonants, and the vocalic pattern. So one pattern of verbs is EE. Okay, we use the letters PL, PL, just to call the names of the patterns. So from both debug and talkback, again, regardless even of the number of consonants, here we have 3, here we have 4. But they all go to the EE pattern with the change of vowels if there is a need to change the vowels, debug and tickback. In contrast, the words spam and click go to the hif'il pattern. This is a pattern with a prefix, he, consonant, consonant, e consonant. So we have the verbs hispim, to send the spam, and ticklick, to click on the mouse. And we have another pattern, the word block, like to block somebody on Facebook, for example. So we have the verb balak, which is in the a'a, pa'al pattern. And finally, we have the loanword pijama, and we have the verb hitpajem, to put on or wear pajamas. Okay? And this is in the hitpa'el pattern. So this pattern has the prefix hit, and again, consonant a, consonant e, consonant. In all these cases, the words, no matter where it comes from, English or from another language, when we form a verb, it has to conform to one of the existing patterns. And one of the questions that are asked and have been debated for a long time is the competition between patterns. Why we select one pattern and not another? For example, as you can see in the other slide, I dropped some of the examples just for space reasons. So for debug, instead of saying debug in the EE pattern, we could have said hidbig, like hispim, or dabag. And for spam, on the other hand, instead of saying hispim, we could have said sipem or sapam. And I haven't demonstrated for all the others, but it's the same principle. So the question which is asked is why we select one pattern and not the other. I might talk about it a little bit today, but this has been discussed by many studies, including myself. But today, I want to focus on another competition. I want to focus on the competition between all these forms and a periphrastic construction. For example, if we take the word binge, like to binge watch, so we have the verb binjej, to binge watch, which is again in the EE pattern. Okay, there is an online example. I will not read it because it's in Hebrew anyway. So binjej is the infinitive form. But we also have the periphrastic form laasot binj, which means literally to do binge. So laasot is the infinitive of the Hebrew verb to do, which is a native verb, plus the loanword. So here the competition is beyond the morphological level, but it is between morphology and syntax, between morphological and periphrastic formation, between formation in one of the patterns, binjej, and the periphrastic form laasot plus binj. So that's one competition I'm going to discuss today. Another one which I might touch briefly is in agent noun formation. Take, for example, the loanword cello. So the word for a cellist can be cello plus one of the following affixes. So we have chelan, we drop the O, okay, chelan, cellist, cello plus an. We have cellist, which is also a borrowed suffix from English and European languages, cellist. And we even have rare examples of both suffixes, cellanist, okay, cello plus an plus ist. This one is the most frequent one, but these forms can also be found online. And again, all these forms compete with a periphrastic form, nagan cello, literally player of cello. Just like we have in English, cellist versus cello player. So the goal of this talk, or this study, is to account for the criteria that play a role in the selection between morphological and periphrastic formation, both in verbal constructions and in agent nouns. And I will show that the selection between the two is not entirely random. Sometimes it's arbitrary, but to a great extent, it is followed by systematic guidelines and dictated by both morphological and semantic syntactic criteria. Methodology is based mainly on web searches on Google and also the Hebrew online Tenkan corpus. But most of the examples, unfortunately, can only be found in Google. We don't have enough existing corpora of spoken Hebrew. We have a few, but the chances of finding enough such examples, especially of loanwords, are very rare. So I rely a lot on Google web searches. But it has many methodological problems that we have to be aware of. I cannot always know whether they are written by native or non-native speakers. There are issues of homonymy and homography, and it's very difficult to quantify the data. There is a lot of garbage, a lot of repetition. However, I do find that in this domain, this is not the ideal, but the optimal methodology. Of course, I can also do experiments, which is another issue. But to find naturalistic data, Google is really some sort of paradise for this, because you can find examples that you can find nowhere, and they reflect, especially if they come from Facebook and Twitter and blogs and online corpora, they can reflect more or less spontaneous spoken language. So the focus is not the amount of examples that I found, but the contrast between items that are found to different extents and items that were not found at all or were extremely rare. And as I will argue, this probably cannot be a coincidence. Sorry. Okay, so competition between morphological and periphrastic structures have been examined from different angles and points of view. This is only a partial list, but few studies address it with respect to Semitic morphology, especially in the domain of derivation. When we talk about competition or rivalry in general, we talk about at least two scenarios. Okay, cases where there's only one winner and the alternative form is blocked. So here we have a dichotomy, and variation where we have two and sometimes more forms that surface to different degrees. So we're talking more about a continuum. My study will examine both, and within two, I will study the degree of variation. Okay, it's also related, of course, to what is known as overabundance or doublets or cellmates. This is more on the morphological level, but it's also related to competition. And the competition between morphological and periphrastic constructions have been addressed with respect to two competing constraints as proposed by Kiparsky: economy versus expressivity or expressiveness. I added to it also lexical necessity versus transparency, namely the need to have a word, a specific word to denote specific concept, as opposed to semantic transparency, where the meaning is much more clear when we express it with two or sometimes more words in a syntactic structure, and the meaning as a result, as I said, is more transparent. I'll just give a basic example. If we take the word psanter, piano in Hebrew, so we have psantran, pianist, morphological formation, and nagan psanter, piano player, literally player of piano. Now, both are supposedly transparent, but this one is less transparent because psantran, all we know that it's an agent noun. We could have assumed a scenario in which it would have meant something else rather than a piano player. It could have been somebody who builds pianos or somebody who tunes pianos or something, some other occupation related to piano. While in nagan psanter, piano player, it cannot be anything else but the person who plays the piano. So we have this competition between, on the one hand, the need for having a specific word or to be more economic, although there are many aspects of the language which are not economic, but still it plays a role. And on the other hand, the need to convey the meaning as expressively as possible. Okay, some background about Semitic word formation. So as you know, it relies on non-concatenative or non-linear morphology, which is the combination of root and pattern. And the pattern indicates the prosodic structure, the vocalic pattern, and in some cases, there are also affixes. In Hebrew, every verb must enter to one out of the 5 or 7 patterns. Why 5 or 7? Because 2 of them are only passive and their formation is automatic. So it depends how you count and who you ask. So we have here the patterns, and I repeat just to make sure we are all on the same page. The capital C denotes the consonantal slot. We have in blue the vocalic pattern, and in red, in some cases, we also have prefixes, and some patterns, not verbal ones, also have affixes. So for example, we have shalach in, again, I'll use the letters p, le to denote the names of the patterns. It's just very conventional. So we have pa'al, nif'al, perf, hif'il, huf'al, pi'el, pu'al, hitpa'el. So for example, we have shalach and nishlach, active and passive, send and to be sent. Hif'il and huf'al, hidpis and hudpas, also active and passive, print and be printed. And here we have a triplet of active, kivetz, shrink, kuvatz, passive, to be shrunk, and in coative, hitpa'el, to get or become shrunk. So you have kivetz, kuvatz, hitkavetz, and they all share, of course, the root kvetz. The relation, the semantic relation between the two patterns is not always transparent. I'll talk about it in a minute. What does it mean to master the verbal patterns of Hebrew and also Arabic? You also have to master the inflectional paradigms of each pattern. So if we take, for example, the verb diber in the ie pattern, so diber is the past form, spoke, medaber with a prefix is the present participle, speak or is speaking, and yedaber is the future. So you have to master the inflectional paradigm of each pattern with respect to vowels, affixes, etc. And you have derivational paradigms. You have the morphological relations between verbs in different patterns that share the same consonantal root, and also the semantic syntactic relations between them, which can be about transitivity, voice, but also other semantic relations. I'll demonstrate it. As I said, it's not always transparent. For example, if we take the pair pa'al, pi'el, two patterns, so we have lamad, to study, and limed, to teach. So this is some sort of relation of causativization. They both share the root le-med, and they're around the same semantic concept. In the other example, on the other hand, it is less transparent. We have yatzar, to create, and yitzer, to manufacture. So it's not causative, it's some semantic relation which is more vague. In pa'al, nif'al with a prefix, we have transitivity alternations. So we have marach, to smear. Nimrach can be passive, to be smeared, but it can also be incoative, just to become smeared by itself. It can be also, by the way, reflexive in principle. And this is the most common patterns that are used for new verb formation, but this is a native one. So we have, and by the way, sometimes they can occupy more than 3 root consonants. So this is an example. We have pirsem, to publish, active, pursam, to be published, and hitparsem, to become published. So we have the root p, r, s, m in the different patterns. Again, mastering the system of Hebrew in general also means many derivational family derivational paradigms. So for example, if you take the root sh, m, r, we have, and this is just a partial list, a family of words that are related to it. So for verbs, we have shamar, to guard or to save. Nishmar, sorry, there's a typo, it should be passive, to be guarded or saved. Shimer, preserve. So as you can see, the relation is less transparent. And we have the action noun, shmira, guarding. The agent noun, shomer, a guard. And other nouns which are related, but the relation is much loose. So we have mishmeret, shift, mishmoret, custody. In this case, there is, for example, no instrument noun. As typical of derivational morphology, there are many gaps, many holes, many things which are unpredictable, or at least less predictable. So if you take the root de pesa, we have the verb hitpis, the action noun hadpasa, and the instrument noun madpeset, printer, but there is no agent noun. Okay, so there could be different options for paradigms. As I said, with verbs, the non-concatenative morphology is a must. Every verb that enters the language, no matter where it comes from, must conform to one of the patterns, We cannot have conversions as in English, for example, when we just say to Google something up, when we just turn it into a verb like that. In Semitic languages, it must receive a pattern. For nouns and adjectives, it's a different story. We have patterns, but we also have other word formation strategies like affixation and other things. Okay, so as I said, when we adopt loanwords into the language and make verbs out of them, they have to agree to one of the patterns, and we have competing patterns. This is just the table which I started with. And the criteria for selecting one pattern, not the other, and sometimes both, have been discussed widely by many studies with respect to morphological criteria, with respect to semantic criteria, the type of verb, incoative, causative, reciprocal, with respect to syntactic criteria, transitivity, and also with respect to the frequency that, of course, plays a role. But as I said, today I will focus on another competition between verb formation and the periphrastic formation. For example, להקליק, to click, versus laasot click, to do click. I want, just to save time, I will not read the whole example, but you can see that these are real examples. They're all with links. The same for לתקבק, to write a talkback, versus לכתוב talkback, which literally means write a talkback. And a few others, hisפים, to send a spam, versus שלח spam, again, send a spam. התפג'ם, which I mentioned before, wore pajama, but we can also say לבש pajama, literally wore pajamas, and restart, like to restart a computer, versus עשה restart, to do restart. So the question that I ask, and this is based on a recent paper of mine that was published in CiCeC, is the selection for criteria one form and not the other. As I said, in many cases we can use both options, but the tendency of using one rather than the other can be partially predictable based on the combination of several factors. And I'll begin with morphological criteria. The first one is the number of syllables. Most studies, as I said, have focused on the competition between patterns. For example, why we say debug, sorry, debug and not hitbig, but we say hisפים and not סיפם. And this is because of cluster preservation. Okay, in principle, we could have randomly select each pattern, but when we say hisפים and not סיפם, we are more faithful to the initial cluster of the base. Okay, so the sp is preserved in the transition from the loanword into the Semitic verbal form. Spam, hisפים. If we said סיפם, we would have broke the cluster. So again, on the one hand, we try every verb must look like a native Hebrew verb. It has to be adjusted to one of the patterns. But on the other hand, we want to be faithful to the source, to the loanword and to its structure as much as we can. So we have this struggle. In debug, sorry, there is no cluster to preserve, so we go for the default, which is EA, PL. Of course, hitbig would have created a cluster that doesn't exist from the first place. So this is just to show you the importance of preserving properties of the base and not just putting it into a pattern. How is it related to my talks? Again, these are previous studies. I said it, the importance of preserving properties of the base in verb formation. I also showed that low structural transparency can block verb formation entirely. And in such a case, there is preference for the periphrastic constructions. How is that so? Most verbs that are derived from bases that do not exceed 2 syllables. Why? In case of 3 or more syllables, at least one of the vowels of the base has to be deleted. And this makes the derived verb less faithful to the stem. So the transition between the loanword and the derived Semitic verb is structurally less transparent. It's possible, but it is less frequent. Let's see an example. So talkback, which I mentioned before, when we say back to write a talkback, all we need to do is change the vowels from OE to, actually here it's even one vowel, OE to IE. If we take a word like catalog, so we have the verb kitleg to put into a catalog, but what is the price that we pay? We have to drop one of the vowels. Otherwise, it won't adjust to the verbal system. Okay, this is the price that we have to pay. So again, I'm not saying it's impossible. We have many verbs like this, but such cases of talkback, tikback are far more frequent than catalog, kitleg. Okay? If we take, for example, the word Photoshop, we could have imagined a scenario in which we had a verb which would be fitchep, to do Photoshop. I put it in a question mark because I think I saw one example, but it's extremely rare and most speakers would probably reject it. On the other hand, there is no semantic reason not to have such a verb because we do have the periphrastic construction asa Photoshop, to do Photoshop. So there is no semantic or syntactic or pragmatic reason or frequency factor that would prevent the formation of such verb, except, in my opinion, the issue of structural transparency. We try to avoid such cases in which, in order to get from Photoshop to fichep, we'd have to get rid of one of the vowels. We have many more extreme examples. So the more vowels, more syllables there are, and also the more consonants there are, the more difficult it is to form a verb. So for example, we have here words which are very frequent in periphrastic constructions, like to babysit, for babysitter, to do relocation, to practice taekwondo, to do a filibuster in the parliament, to do a paparazzi, okay? So we have asa babysitter, asa relocation, asa taekwondo with the Hebrew verb asa, which functions like some sort of auxiliary verb. There is no problem. Again, conceptually, there is no prevention of having a verb. And again, I put them all in question mark because I could sometimes come across one or two. I will show you an example, but these are extremely rare. Again, because verb formation would require much more modifications, and the relations between the potentially derived verb and the base would be structurally less transparent. So here is a counterexample for what I'm saying. I came across, for example, lepapretz, to do paparazzi, okay? And of course, the periphrastic construction, laasot paparazzi, literally to do paparazzi. But again, I could find maybe one or two examples as opposed to hundreds of such examples, okay? Such cases also have implications for a word-based approach, and specifically for the theory of stem modification. This is a whole debate, so it's not the heart of the talk. If there is time, maybe I'll go back to it in discussion, but I cannot avoid mentioning it at all. So one of the debates in Semitic morphology is what the exact mechanism of deriving new words based on existing, especially if they don't have, if they're loanwords and they do not have a consonantal root. So one approach is we extract the root extraction, and put it into a pattern. The other approach is stem modification, which looks at the whole structure of the word and tries to keep it as faithful as possible, as is, with minimal modifications. And again, with keeping in mind that it has to eventually look like a Hebrew Semitic verb. And I'll just go back for a minute. So such cases that show, even these ones, which are older, where we take into account not only the consonants and their order, but also other properties of the base, like consonant clusters or the number of syllables and other things, show that root extraction by itself, I won't say can't, but it would be more difficult to explain. It would be somehow redundant. Okay, if there is time, I'll go back to it in the discussion period. Okay, so this is the first constraint, the number of syllables and number of vowels. Okay. The second constraint is about non-native suffixes. Loanwords with typical non-native suffixes, especially the English ing, are rarely have derived verbal counterparts. And my claim is that Hebrew speakers are sensitive even to the internal structure of loanwords. And once they identify elements like ing, okay, which are typically non-native, typical of other languages, specifically English, they tend to reject them from the verbal system, so they are less likely to be integrated. Again, I have some contrasting examples. So the word shopping, I did found a few examples of shipeng, to do shopping, but far less than asa shopping. And here I have many other examples of words which were borrowed from English with ing and are highly frequent in periphrastic constructions, but don't have derived verbs. So ghosting, like to ghost on Facebook or something. So we don't have gisteng, okay? To do fishing, to do booking, to do rafting, to do boarding on an airplane, to do streaming, okay? They're all found with the verb asa, with the periphrastic construction, but not without verbal counterparts. And again, most of them, I think, yeah, all of them have only two syllables. So in principle, there's no problem to turn them into verbs. But my argument is that once we identify this ing thing, we tend to reject it from integration into the verbal system. In this respect, I want to mention a joint study with Fiamet and Amer from University of Nancy, where we did this cross-linguistic comparison between French and Hebrew, and we have seen that also in French there is some sensitivity to the internal structure of loanwords, and the ing forms are less likely to be integrated. In French, it works differently because it's not a Semitic language, so the ing tends to be drop. So for example, if you take the loanword shopping, so we have the French verb choper, okay? We do have also shoppinge, but far less frequent. I'll show you an example in a minute. For quitting, for example, we have quit quitter, but not quit quittinge. Okay, so also French speakers are sensitive to the internal structure of loanwords and tend not to integrate them fully. So in French, we have bien choper, okay, to shop well. And also we have shoppinge. In Hebrew, we found a few examples of le chapeng, which is the infinitive of shipeng, okay? But again, it is far more frequent with periphrastic formation. So we have fait du shopping, okay, and laasot, shopping. Okay? So maybe this rejection of typical non-native suffixes is beyond only these two languages, something to explore further. Okay. So this shows that we have sensitivity to the morphological mechanism, to the morphological structure of loanwords. In cases where it identifies typical non-native morphological elements, it tends not to integrate such words into the verbal system. So this is just an interim summary. Okay, so just to make sure we are on the same page, there are two constraints so far that determine the selection between the two structures: the number of syllables and the existence of non-native suffixes. Now, I'll just watch the time. I will move to talk more about semantic syntactic criteria. The first one is semantic transparency. Low semantic transparency blocks periphrastic formation. How so? The meaning of the derived verb is not transparent in relation to the base, and it is frozen in some way. For example, if we take the word format, which is borrowed into Hebrew as a noun, we have the verb firmet in the PL pattern. Format, firmet, but it has a very narrow restricting meaning only to the domains of computers, like to format a computer. It has no other meaning. So periphrastically, we could have said shina format, change format, or sambe format, put into a format, and it exists, but not in the domain of computers. So here we have some sort of what Aharonov calls niche differentiation. So we have two supposedly competing patterns, but each, like in ecology, each species finds its own niche. So firmet is restricted to the domain of formatting in computer, and it has simply no periphrastic alternative. Similarly, torpedo, we have the word torpedo. So we have the verb tirped, again in the PL pattern. And you can see here the price that we pay is that we drop one of the vowels. Sometimes it happens. But this verb has, again, a specific metaphorical meaning which means to ruin somebody's plans or to put an obstacle. Okay, it's not about torpedo specifically. So the meaning has become to some extent frozen. So as I like to tell my students, when it's frozen, let it go, like the movie, like the song. Okay? Okay, so the verb has a metaphorical meaning which is not expressed via periphrastic construction, so there is no expressivity. Okay, because the meaning is specific to this sense. I'll just show a few more examples. So we have the word magnet. So we have the verb hitmagnect, to magnetize. And again, it can be the literal meaning. Here I'll read the example. זה הגיוני שתכשיט מכסף אמיתי יכול להתמגנט. It is reasonable that a jewelry made of real silver can magnetize. And we also have the metaphorical meaning. אדם כריזמטי שאי אפשר לא להתמגנט אליו. A charismatic person to whom it is impossible not to magnetize. Okay, but in each case, it has a very specific meaning, which has no competing periphrastic construction. Okay, so this is about semantic transparency, which sometimes favor the morphological formation. The second criteria is the lexical category. And here we have a hierarchy or some sort of continuum of the likelihood of verb morphological formation based on the lexical category of the loanword. On the one edge of the scale, we have verbs where we can have morphological formation only. I'll explain in a minute. On the other edge of the scale, we have loan adjectives, which occur mostly in periphrastic verbal constructions, and nouns are somewhat in between based on the criteria that we have discussed so far. Let's see. In verbs, we have obligatory morphological formation because verbs that are borrowed directly into Semitic languages must have a pattern, as I said. So, for example, we have the verb hitfayed, to fade, or dilver, to deliver. There is no noun, loan noun, so there is no way to express it periphrastically. We have to put it into the verbal system, okay? Like I said, words like fed do not used in Hebrew. There is no loan word like fade. It is taken directly from the verb. So these are just examples, hitfayed, ledalver, just to show that it is used. And another example, just hitmarjej, like to merge. This is also in the computer domain. Versus, pay attention. I'll read the example. Esmach im tuchal leforward et המייל. I'll be happy if you could forward this email. Versus, אני צריך לעשות forward. I should do forward. So here we have competition. Why? Because the word forward is borrowed, first of all, as a noun. Okay, so we have the two alternatives. We can put it in the periphrastic construction, laasot, forward, to do forward, but also we can make a verb out of it, leforward. Okay, so again, if it's a verb, it must go to a morphological pattern. If it's a noun, we have the two options. Okay, so nouns, as I said, they are borrowed directly without morphological adaptation, only phonological, apart from rare cases. So we have many borrowed nouns like lasagna, date, baseball. For example, here we have variation between croissant and corazon, but it's phonological. And nouns can be the base for both morphological and periphrastic formation. For example, the word comeback, so we have hit comeback, or also asa comeback, to do comeback. Adjectives, interestingly, are an intermediate category between nouns and verbs with respect to borrowing. Why are they intermediate category? Because they demonstrate a variety of adaptation patterns. We have direct borrowing with no morphological adaptation in words like snob and cool. We have three types of morphological adaptation. We have affixation of E. For example, effective, we have effective. E is a typical adjectival suffix in Hebrew. Okay, so effective is already an adjective, but we still add E to it to make it look like a more typical Hebrew adjective. Sometimes we have truncation of the final consonant, and it also results in an E-ending adjectives like comic, so we have comi, or tragic, tragi. And we also have templatic formation, like medupras, as depressed. Okay, so we can also have pattern formation. Now, most adjectives have periphrastic verbal constructions and no morphological derived counterparts. So, for example, the loan adjective large, in the sense of a generous person, we have niya large, to become large, but not something like hitlarej, which could have potentially existed. And the same for tragi, tragic, and senili, senile. Okay, these are all possible in periphrastic constructions, but they do not have verbal counterparts. And what I claim is that adjectives are perceived, at least partially, as derived entries and as morphologically more complex. And therefore, there is a tendency to avoid further derivation. So nouns, on the other hand, are basic, perceived as basic entries. They usually impose no morphological complexity, so they can be the base for both morphological and periphrastic formation. Okay, just to show the contrast, we have the verb obsessia, obsession. So we do have the derived verb hit obsess, to become obsessed. And of course, we can also say nihiya beobsessia, became in obsession. So because again, obsessia is a borrowed noun, so it's okay. But as an adjective, it is quite rare to find derived verbs. As I said, adjectives are perceived as more complex morphologically as derived forms. I assume that the lexicon distinguishes between basic entries and derived entries, and therefore they are less likely to be the base of further derivations. Okay, so this is just to summarize the continuum. Like I said, on the one edge of the scale, we have things like hitfayed from fade, which is based directly on a verb. On the other edge of the scale, we have things like komi, to become comic. So we have only the periphrastic construction, niya komi, Okay? And in the middle, we have the nouns where we have, again, from comeback, we have both hit comeback and asa comeback. Like I said, nouns never undergo morphological adaptation. Verbs are systematically integrated into the morphological system, and adjectives are in the middle. And the intermediary status of both adjectives is also manifested in the selection between morphological and periphrastic construction to express the verbal meaning. Okay, in general, I relate to the distinction between basic and derived forms. And again, it's of course a theoretical assumption, and it can be debated. And I argue that nouns are perceived as basic entries, and they are borrowed as is. Adjectives are partially perceived as derived entries that typically undergo morphological adaptation. And this is why they don't undergo further formations. And we have even similar tendencies in native adjectives. Let me demonstrate it. We have basic adjectives in Hebrew like rachav, wide, and we have the verb hitrachev of the same root to become wide, and also the periphrastic construction nihiya rachav. They both mean become wide, based on the adjective rachav. In contrast, we have derived adjectives. For example, we have achil, which means edible, which is derived or assumed to be derived from the verb achal, to eat. So achal is to eat, achil is edible. So achil is a derived one, both morphologically and semantically. It is based on the meaning of the verb. And indeed, we don't have a verb which would have meant to become edible. Again, even though semantically, conceptually, there is no reason not to have such a verb. So we only have the periphrastic construction, nihiya achil, literally became edible, but no other potentially derived verb. Even again, it's a root, it's an existing root. There's no problem in putting it to one of the patterns, but it doesn't happen. So this is just to provide further support for the distinction between what is perceived as basic and what is perceived as derived. Okay, so this was the second criteria, the distinction between lexical categories of loanwords. Finally, the last criteria is about expressing transitivity, which is more syntactic. And let me just watch my time. Yeah. Morphological formation is more frequent in transitive verbs with the presence of a direct object as a patient. In case of periphrastic formation, the patient, I put it in a question mark because we can argue which thematic role it is, the patient can be only realized as an indirect object using the prepositions like le, to, or there is no complement at all. Let me demonstrate it. Let's take the Hebrew loanword simulatia, which is simulation. So we have the verb simlets, okay, and we also have the periphrastic construction asa simulatia, okay, to do simulation. Now, here we have an example of a morphological formation. Kashe lesamlets et ze. It is difficult to simulate it. So here we have lesamlets, the derived verb, with a direct object, and we also have here the accusative particle et. Ze means this, and et is just, it has no meaning, it is just the some sort of accusative marker. So once we have a direct object, we have a verb, because we cannot express it periphrastically with a direct object. But we have yesh derech laasot simulatia leze. There is a way to simulate it, but pay attention, we have laasot, to do simulatia, do and simulatia, and we have the preposition le. It's an indirect object. But pay attention, it's the same meaning. Only here, ze, the patient, is a direct object, and here it's indirect object. And here, איך מצליחים לעשות סימולציה? How do you manage to simulate? Here there's no complement at all. So what I argue is once we have the direct object present, there's greater motivation to have a morphological form. Let me show you another example. I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, binjej, to binge watch, and laasot binj. So here, they are both without objects. But in the next examples, we can see the same distinction. I will not read the whole examples just to save time. We have מבנג'ג'ת את הסרטים, binge watching Marvel's movies. Okay, again, we have the accusative marker, את הסרטים. So here it's a direct object to which binge watch the movies. Here we have לבנג'ג' על podcast, okay, To binge watch a podcast, what we have the preposition al, it means on, but here it has no specific meaning, but it's a preposition, it's not an accusative marker. And the same here, laasot binj al eze sidra. To binge watch some TV series, but again, it's with the preposition. So again, when we have a direct object, there is a greater tendency to favor the morphological formation. In other cases, we opt for periphrastic formation. Okay, why is it? In general, transitivity, according to Hopper and Thompson and subsequent studies, is not a dichotomy, but it is determined by a number of parameters. It's a gradient concept, and it is property of clauses, constructions, rather than only verbs. And the notion of transitivity can be expressed by a set of more specific semantic features. Here, I would focus on the affectedness of the object. Okay? And what I claim is that once we want to express the affectedness of the object, we need to put it as a direct object position, syntactically. And as a result, we need a verb, an independent verb, and we cannot do it with a periphrastic construction. Okay? The need for a separate morphological structure is stronger with respect to transitivity because we have realization of more arguments, we have expression of affectedness of the patient, and we have semantic transparency of the verb argument structure. Once it has a direct object, we have a greater representation of the concept that the verb denotes and the arguments that participate in this event. In contrast, in case of an indirect object or no object at all, we have higher likelihood of periphrastic structures. Okay? So here, it's not only the semantic properties of the verb and its morphological properties, but also the syntax, how the object is realized and whether it is realized or not. Okay, I'll make a summary, and you tell me if there is a time I might talk a little bit about agent nouns. I've shown that the selection between morphological and periphrastic constructions can be partially predicted based on systematic guidelines. With respect to morphophonology, these criteria can block morphological formation due to low structural transparency between the loan base and the derived verb, and also the existence of the non-native affixes like ing. Low semantic transparency tends to block periphrastic formation. These are cases with no alternative periphrastic construction that would express the same meaning of the derived verb. The lexical category of the base provides partial prediction with respect to the possibility to employ other construction. And finally, morphological formation is more frequent in transitive constructions. Okay, so this is about verbs. Should I go on a little bit about agents? Touch it a little bit? Okay, I'll talk about it more generally, but and I'll try to connect and then I'll conclude. Okay, so this is the second part of the talk, but a very short part. Agent noun formation in Hebrew. In agent noun formation, unlike verbs, we have multiple word formation strategies. We have affixation, and the base can be native or non-native, and the suffix can be native or non-native. So, for example, for bank, we have bankai, banker. For lul, which is poultry coop, we have lulan, the person who works there. Tractor, we have tractorist. So here we have both loan and derive and base and suffix. We have direct borrowing like chef. We have acronym formation. For example, mankal, CO, stands for menahel klali, general manager. And we also have non-concatenative formation in participle patterns like menahel, manager, which corresponds to the verb nihel, to manage, or choker, investigator, which corresponds to the verb chakar, to investigate. And we have some non-participle patterns which are not connected to specific verbal patterns like nagan, player, or sachkan, player. And we also have a competition between periphrastic and morphological formation. So for example, trombon-ist versus nagan, trombone player. Okay, so we have the ist suffix and the periphrastic formation. Okay, this is based on corpus set. Just to show what I did, I took as many. Here I focus only on musical instruments, which are the basis of agent noun formation, and I also included the native words because here the tendencies are more or less the same. So if we take the word khalil, which means flute, I looked for all the forms in all conjugations. So if Khalilan this is the agent noun suffix, but I also looked at it in feminine form and in masculine plural, masculine feminine plural, etc., with other suffixes as well, versus the periphrastic form like nagan Khalil, player of flute, but also in feminine, in plural, etc. Okay, just to show you some tendencies. So here I have some numbers based on the Hebrew Tenton corpus. So in some cases, the morphological formation is far more frequent. In other cases, the periphrastic one is far less frequent, and there are some cases in the middle. So some descriptive observations. First of all, variation exists, which is interesting by itself. Frequency effects could play a role, but not in all cases. There are some cases of semantic differentiation, of niche differentiation, as proposed by Arnold, but not on these cases. I couldn't find any. I thought, for example, that one form could be maybe a professional player, one of them could be an amateur, but going over the examples, I found no such tendencies. Type of suffix also not playing a role. Number of syllables and stress also not playing a role. Whether it's the base is ending in vowel of consonant, and also where there is a phonological alternation of the base. For example, abuv, oboe, we have abuvan, but for psanter, piano, we have psantran and not psanteran. One vowel is deleted, but also these have not been found to play a role. But again, not having a finding is also an interesting finding. But what did I find? Okay, again, I could show that the selection between the two structures could be partially predictable. One of them is avoiding morphological complexity. What does it mean? Periphrastic formation is preferred in case the base is morphologically complex, namely consists of affixes. And this actually connects us to the distinction between lexical categories in verb formation. Something which is perceived as morphologically complex is less likely to participate in further derivations. It's possible. I'm not saying it's completely out, but it is less likely. So for example, Khalil is basic. It's a flute. Khalilit means recorder. The it is some sort of a diminutive suffix. It's also a feminine suffix, by the way, but here it's diminutive. But here it's not diminutive. It's just it's this thing. Okay, it's another type of instrument. Or organ, we have organit, which is a small organ. Or metziltaim, here it has the aim suffix, which means it's this tool. Okay, so it's some sort of dual form, even though there is no independent base. But what I'm saying is that these musical instrument nouns are morphologically more complex because they consist of affixes, and this is why they are less likely to participate in further derivations. So you can see in this context, we have guitarist, so we have guitarist, no problem. Saxophonist, again, no problem. Psantran, and you can see we have different affixes, but that's not the issue. But for Khalilit, we don't have Khalilitan or Khalilitist because it already has a suffix inside of it. So you only have the periphrastic construction, nagan Khalilit. And we have other examples. Preference for periphrastic formation, even stronger in case the base consists of inflectional suffixes, because as you know, derivation typically cannot follow inflection. So for example, we have nagan Khaliliot recorders. So sometimes we have this concept of somebody who plays different recorders together. So Khaliliot is already pluralized. And here there's no option of adding a derivational suffix after an inflectional one. So we have nagan Khaliliyot. The iyot is the plural, but we don't have Khaliliyotan. It would be Khalilit plus plural plus derivational suffix. Very, very rare. And you can see for Khalil, flute, we have Khalilan, no problem. But nagan Khaliliyot, and you can see the same speaker-writer uses both morphological and periphrastic formation in the same sentence, in the same context. Okay? So this is one, morphological complexity. We also have avoiding syntactic complexity. And this is a case where periphrastic formation is preferred in case the base is syntactically complex. And it can be a combination of two nouns or a noun and an adjective. Let's see. So I stick to the flute. So we have Khalil, but we also have Khalil Tzad, which is this thing, which is literally, it means flute of side, because we play it on the side. So Khalil Tzad, this is the compound. So we have Khalil Tzad, Nagan Khalil Tzad, player of this type of flute, but it is much more common than Khalilan Tzad. Okay, why? Because we tend not to break the syntactic structure by adding a suffix on the first noun. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible. We have such examples, but we are more likely to have the periphrastic construction. So here we take Khalil, add to it the agent noun suffix, and then add the other noun. So we break it, and we try to avoid it. And again, I found such examples, but they're far less common. Another example of guitar. So you have guitar chashmalit, electric guitar, which again, it's a different musical instrument. So you have here a noun and an adjective. So how do we make an agent noun, like a player of electric guitar? Again, we can say nagan guitar chashmalit, which would be a player of electric guitar. And this is the most common form, the periphrastic form, because we don't break the electric guitar. We keep it sound. Okay. I did found some rare examples where we do break it, but they are extremely strange and rare. So here we have guitarist chashmalit. And what is strange is that there seems to be no agreement between the first noun, which is the player, and because guitar is feminine. So the adjective here is feminine. Or for example, guitarist chashmali, which is again very strange because that would mean that the player is electric, something, or electrified or something else. So I did find some such rare examples, but like I said, there is greater preference for just saying taking guitarra chashmalit, the complex syntactic compound, or lexical compound, depends who you ask. Anyway, we have a compound, we tend not to break it and just add the player before it. Okay? I'll skip a few examples. We also have the issue of the number of potential suffixes. And in this case, variation in suffix selection brings about preference for periphrastic construction. For example, so psanter, piano, we only have psantran. For ugav, pipe organ, we have a few competing affixes, ugavar, okay, ugavan, and ugavist. So the multiple of potential suffixes brings about avoiding morphological formation at all, not at all, but a tendency to avoid morphological formation. And therefore, we prefer simply nagan ugav, player of ugav, organ, pipe organ. Okay? Okay, so to summarize, I did this very fast because I don't want to keep you too much. We have a tendency to select periphrastic formation in case of morphological complexity and syntactic complexity. So I want to conclude in general. The study has shown that we have preference for periphrastic formation, and that can be triggered by both morphological factors, specifically avoiding morphological complexity in case of number of syllables, modification of the base, multiple suffixes, derivation or inflection, and also the existence of non-native suffixes. We have syntactic factors like avoiding syntactic complexity in the case of agent nouns, the issue of transitivity in the case of verb formation, the lexical category, and we also have the semantic factor, which is about the degree of semantic transparency or lack thereof. In general, the study adds to previous studies that examined the competition between morphological and periphrastic formation in general, and it offers criteria that play a role in selecting either structure. Like I said, it's not black and white. I'm talking about a continuum, not a dichotomy, because there is variation. And the study in general also sheds light on the degree of integration of loanwords, and this provides direct access to word formation online in real time, and it shows which different types of criteria are taken into consideration. I'll be happy to answer your questions. If you're interested in any collaborations or cross-linguistic comparisons, I'll be very happy to hear. So thank you for listening and for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk and for many examples you gave. Now we have time for questions. Maybe I have one to start. So as far as I could understand, so loanword adaptation in Hebrew is very different from European languages. Still, it's what seems to be similar is that nouns do not need morphological adaptation. They can be taken as they are.
Yes.
But loan verbs need to be adapted to be used as verbs. So, and if I'm not wrong, you mentioned a group of loanwords that are used just as verbs, not as nouns. It was somewhere around slide 45, 46. The example was fate.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me more? Because it looks like it's really like contradictory to this tendency. So how large this group may be, or how specific it is? Because it was real like surprising to me. Because I would expect the opposite. So to have nouns that are not turned into verbs, but not to have just verbs without nouns. So that's my question.
Yeah, so here speakers encounter the concept of fading, which is directly based on the verb fade, but the word fade is not borrowed. So the verb is taken directly from English or could be another language. So there is no really borrowing of an element, just making the English word into a Hebrew verb directly. It fits into the like a general typology that verbs tend to be integrated. I mean, if there's no base noun, it has to come directly from the verb, and then therefore it has to be integrated into the system.
Like how large the group is, or is it like a standard pattern, or it's more an exception?
It's less common than nouns, of course. Nouns, we have much more borrowing of nouns. Yeah, I couldn't find a lot of such examples. Yeah.
Okay, so they are simply like just verbs, just a small like verbs with small morphological families. So they do not like undergo this derivation to nouns and other stuff. So they just are used as verbs, and no nouns are needed for this.
In principle, I mean, once we have the verb, the Hebrew verb, it can be the base for other words which are nouns. It's not very, for example, you can have an action noun like hitfaidut, for example. I haven't seen it, but it's potentially possible. But since it came directly from a verb and there's no borrowed noun, so the family size would be smaller, or even sometimes just one member. Yeah.
So I will follow Magda's question. I'm interested in the adjectival nouns, and as you talked about loan adjectives that are in the middle between loan verbs and loan nouns, is there any mechanism in Hebrew to derive the adjectival nouns from loan adjectives, like complexity derives from adjective complex in English?
Yes. Yeah. We have this mechanism. For example, if you take a word like snob, which is borrowed directly, so snobiyut would be snobness, something like that, the property of snobness. I have to admit, I haven't checked it. I'm just telling you on top of my head my intuitions as a speaker. Yeah, like tragic, so tragiut, yeah, it's possible, but it's a good idea to check. I haven't checked it a lot, but I'm not sure how productive it is. But in principle, we have this ut suffix, which turns adjectives into, or not just adjectives, but mostly adjectives into abstract nouns. Yeah.
So it is a typical, let's say, typical Hebrew suffix used for the adjectival nouns in.
Yes, absolutely, okay. Yeah. Of course, for native Hebrew adjectives, it's very common.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So if there are no more questions, so we will continue. Okay.
Is it possible to make it a model? Like, this is mostly not quantitative, but like partial. It's based on data, basically.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not like crispy quantitative, like something like a model. So is it possible to make some linear model of your data and make it something like, if this and this happens, then most probably it will be periphrastic, or if this and this and this, then it will be something like that.
Yeah, but you added the word most probably, so it has to be emphasized because there are a lot of exceptions, and these are mainly tendencies. But in principle, yeah. And once we have a combination of factors, for example, if the base is morphologically complex and there is, let's say, the issue of semantic transparency, of transitivity. So if this and that, though, this can increase the chances of morphological formation or periphrastic formation. I haven't done it, but it seems to be doable. Yeah. Yeah. But again, it's important to bear in mind that it would reflect tendencies, so it not be like there would be many exceptions.
Yes, of course, it's a language. So
yeah.
Okay, thank you. So now I Let's see more questions. So thank you once again.
Thank you.